morning. Welcome back to the Marble Mountain Ranch hearing. I'm Stephen Moore, Vice Chair of the State Water Board and Hearing Officer for this proceeding. I will be assisted by Staff Counsel Lily Weaver, Staff Environmental Scientist Mmr Am, and Staff Engineer Gene McHugh. Also have other staff assisting us. And before we get started, a reminder on evacuation procedures. Please note the exits. The easiest way to exit the building if there's a fire alarm are the doors to my left and your right. Please take your valuables and exit the building. Our evacuation location's out in the parking lot at the front door, and when we get the all clear, we'll all return to the room together. We're broadcasting this hearing on the internet and recording both audio and video. In addition, a court reporter is present to prepare a transcript of this proceeding. When you speak, please be sure to use a microphone so that everyone can hear you. Please take a moment to turn off or mute your cell phones. Even if you think it's already off or muted, please take a moment to double check, and we appreciate it. Today we're going to begin with the direct testimony of the Kuruk tribe's remaining witnesses. After completing their case in chief, we will proceed to the direct testimony of Old Man River Trust's remaining witnesses. After concluding their case in chief, first, the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, and then second, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and Institute for Fisheries Resources will have an opportunity to present opening statements. Subsequently, there will be an opportunity for parties to present rebuttal evidence. And as a housekeeping reminder, as we announced on Monday, we will be stopping the hearing today at 3:30 p.m. this afternoon, 3:30, not 4:30. And we did talk about thinking about rebuttal testimony and the time frame of that. If A, you're going to be doing a rebuttal, and B, how long you think it would take, just for the purposes of trying to plan the time the next day or two. So I would welcome that discussion. But first, as a reminder, are there any questions or housekeeping items before we continue?
I would just like, on our mid-morning break, instead of 5 minutes, if I could get 10 minutes so that I can coordinate my other hearing.
Sure. I would think we would take more than that even. I think maybe 15 minutes, so no
Yeah,
problem. 10 minutes minimum, no problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll need that much. And then I guess I had forgotten we're done at 3:30 today.
That's right.
I really hope we can get done today.
Well, I'm open to the idea of a shorter lunch break, if that would
Okay.
work for parties.
That would be fine with us.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
maybe we could do a 30-minute break, and then do and that way accommodate schedules better.
Okay.
I'm open to that.
And our rebuttal is, maybe 10, 15 minutes max.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I would ask. Thank you very much. The prosecution team, do you have an estimate of your rebuttal time frame?
I'm going to estimate maybe 30 minutes. We'd like it to be less.
Mm-hmm.
One of our witnesses has something scheduled at 2. I was hopefully we'll be done by then, or he'll be done by then.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not looking like that, I'll check in with them and see.
Well, I appreciate that. It's good to know kind of the scope of the time that folks are anticipating, and that sounds like a manageable amount of time. So I appreciate the input. Does anybody else have any input on a planned rebuttal testimony? Seeing nobody raise their hand. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and proceed. And Mr. Hunt, Mr. Tucker, and Mr. Soto have come forward, or at least Mr. Soto and Mr. Hunt. We'll now hear the Kuruk tribe's remaining direct testimony, followed by cross-examination in the order I previously identified. Redirect and recross-examination of the witnesses may then be permitted. And so this time, are you going to, I guess I should go ahead and administer the oath because you're going to start questioning. Am I correct?
Yeah, I'm gonna do Todd Soto and Craig Tucker separately, and so we're gonna do Todd Soto now.
Okay, that sounds good. Will the witness please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. I appreciate it. You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Soto. Will you please state your name and address for the record?
My name is Taz Soto. I reside at 233 T-Bar Road, Soames Bar, California, 95568.
And what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's in fisheries from Humboldt State University with emphasis in freshwater fisheries.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm employed by the Karuk tribe. I work for the Department of Natural Resources, and I'm the fisheries program manager and senior fisheries biologist.
And how would you describe your responsibilities in your current job?
Well, I'm responsible for managing the program, administering studies, monitoring, implementing restoration projects along the Klamath River.
And how long have you been working in your current job?
I started working for the Karuk tribe in 2000, so 17 years.
And during those 17 years, just give us a kind of description of how you spend your time.
Well, I'm fortunate enough to spend some of my time in the field actually getting wet and seeing fish and doing field work. But I would say now most of my time is probably spent doing administrative stuff and writing reports, administrating budgets, that kind of stuff.
And how long have you, so Soames Bar is in the Klamath Basin. How long have you lived along the Klamath River?
I have lived along the Klamath River and Salmon River, tributary to the Klamath River in Soames Bar, for my entire life.
How many times would you say you visited Stanshaw Creek?
I would say it's got to be over 100 times over the course of 17 years.
And that's at the mouth of Stanshaw Creek where it meets the Klamath River?
Correct.
And that's in those 17 years. Have you visited that location at other times as well?
Yes, just it's a boat launch there, so we take our drift boats out there, put them in.
So is it fair to say that you visited Stanshaw Creek every year since
Yes.
2001? And just generally, what is the value of Stanshaw Creek to Salmonids?
Well, the primary value to Stanshaw Creek is its thermal refugia value and the cold water that Stanshaw Creek provides, and the off-channel pond habitat it's located in lower Stanshaw Creek.
Just a point of order here, the clock isn't ticking. So I don't know how long we've been going, but
We began around 9:36 or 9:37 by my recollection. So about 3 minutes or so.
do you want to adjust that before we? Okay, looks like we're back. The clock is ticking now. So let's try that one again. Based on your observations and in general, what is the value of Stanshaw Creek to salmon?
Like I said before, the primary value for salmon is its cold water refuge and the off-channel pond that's located in lower Stanshaw Creek.
And what other value does well, why is that cold water pond valuable, and at what times of year?
Well, salmon in the Klamath River are dependent on thermal refuge during the summer months. So as temperatures are rising in the early summer, fish, primarily salmonids, migrate into thermal refugia to seek shelter from lethal water temperatures in the main stem.
And are there other values that Stanshaw Creek provides to salmon at different times of year?
Yeah, it's home to resident steelhead. There's a very small population of anadromous steelhead that spawn in Stanshaw Creek. Chinook salmon use the thermal refugia as well as steelhead.
Okay, and although we've talked about it a decent amount here at this hearing, I think it'd be good to get your impressions as well. So what are the values of these thermal refugia to salmon? And can you explain what a thermal refugia is?
Well, a thermal refugia, I spent a good deal of my early career studying thermal refugia, and at that time they really weren't well defined. And so the definition of a thermal refugia is, in simple terms, a cold water patch in an otherwise warm water river system.
Are there different kinds of thermal refugia?
Yeah. Generally, there are 3 types of thermal refugia. There's the cold water plume at the confluence of the tributary. There's the floodplain habitats, such as the off-channel pond at Stanshaw Creek. Those are usually flood channels that are fed by cold water tributaries. And then the lower reaches of cold water tributaries are thermal refugia as well.
And if you could, if this is possible, could you explain which type of thermal refugia that coho salmon prefer?
Well, coho salmon prefer complex habitat, slow water, low velocity water, abundant cover, and they prefer off-channel habitat, such as the off-channel pond at Stanshaw. They typically will migrate out of the main stem. They don't prefer habitat that doesn't fit their habitat suitability criteria, which is low velocity and abundant cover.
Okay, so up on the screen here is figure 1 from what you've called the Coho Ecology Report, Mr. Soto. That's how you refer to it to me. It's Exhibit 9, KT 9 in the record, and it's page 4. This is figure 1 from that. Can you use this figure to help explain to us how the coho salmon use thermal refugia throughout the year in the Klamath River?
Okay, so this is a conceptual model of how coho salmon utilize the main stem Klamath River. So you see the red line is temperature, the blue line is flow, and then so if you go over to the left side of the chart, you'll see spring runoff. That's when the coho salmon fry emerge from the gravels. They disperse into the main stem river, and then as they do that with the spring runoff, and then as the water temperature begins to rise, usually in June, sometimes late May, and sometimes as late July, depending on the water year. So as those temperatures are rising, coho salmon will be forced to redistribute into thermal refuge. And then as the summer progresses and those temperatures start to decline in the late summer and early fall, the Klamath will cool off, and that allows coho salmon to redistribute to other locations. And then as the fall redistribution, fall-winter redistribution occurs usually in the late fall or early winter, and that's with the onset of peak flows as stream velocities increase in tributaries. Coho salmon are forced to find winter refuge. So, and that's with the fall freshets and peak flows, as you see with the blue line in the winter time there. So we have a very dynamic flow regime in the Klamath that can be extremely high in the wintertime, and velocities can be quite high. So coho have to find, not only summer refuge, but definitely winter refuge. And the pond at Sandshaw Creek is known to be a winter refuge as well.
Okay, then the next slide here is from Exhibit 9, KT9 as well. It's on page 24. Can you, using this, just help us understand a little bit more about how the coho salmon use the Klamath River as a whole?
So there's so non-natal coho. That's kind of what this depicts, is the use of basically fish that come out of spawning tributaries such as the Shasta River or the Scott River. They end up in the main stem during the spring as fry, and then as summer happens, temperatures rise, they distribute into cold water refuges, and this is just an example of that from the Shasta River. These are pit tag fish from the Shasta River that end up in the main stem, and then the river miles on the bottom, those river miles represent locations where we've recaptured those fish in cold water refuges or off-channel ponds.
And so tell us where these locations, there's these red bars on the graph, tell us where these locations are along the river.
So river mile 175, that's the confluence of the Shasta, and then river mile 125, roughly that area, that's around Syad Valley. That's a very large refuge for coho. And then if you go down further, I think it's right around the river mile 75. That's where Stanchaw Creek is located. Okay. So basically, these fish are using these refuges that are scattered through the river continuum.
So this is figure 7 from Exhibit KT9 on page 25. Maybe just explain what these yellow dots are and how they relate to the issues we've been discussing.
So the yellow dots represent the actual locations on a map of the red bars that we were just looking at. So if you go down and you look where Stanchaw Creek is located, and it says Stanchaw Pond, that's a location that a coho from the Shasta River was recaptured. Looks like it was detected there in October of 2011, and then resided there for at least through the winter. There's another, the last date it was detected was like later in November. Like I said before, once fish locate these winter refuges, they typically stay. We don't see a whole lot of movement during the dead of winter, and then in the spring these fish leave as smolt and make their migration to the ocean.
Do the fish also generally stay if they find these refuge during the summer months?
They can stay if there's proper habitat. Sometimes there's higher densities. Density will force fish to move. Low food supply will force fish to move. Other things can, but typically if coho salmon find the habitat that suits their habitat suitability, they'll stay put.
So in all of the times, well, let me ask you one more question about this. So I see these dots are sort of spread along the main stem here of the Klamath River. In your opinion, what happens to the coho salmon if some of these locations are not functional or completely absent?
Well, then their likelihood of finding a thermal refugia is decreased. Their exposure to warm water increases. Their likelihood of mortality goes up. Their exposure to fish disease increases. So I would say their survival goes down.
All right. So at Stanshaw Creek in particular, what harms to coho and other salmon habitat have you observed?
Could you repeat that one more time?
At Stanshaw Creek location, what harms to the salmon habitat have you observed?
So the habitat at Stanshaw Creek is affected by the flows, and the flows are impacted by Marble Mountain Ranch diversion. I've also seen the habitat affected by sedimentation from Stanshaw Creek.
And in your opinion, what are the causes of these habitat alterations?
Well, the primary cause of the flow impacts are the Marble Mountain Ranch diversion, and
I guess I'm more, aside from the cause, let's just talk about what are the causes of the harm, not necessarily who's responsible, but what causes the types of harm that you've observed.
well, when fish can't access the refugia, they're exposed to lethal water temperatures in the main stem. If fish become trapped in the refugia, then they're unable to move. So they're basically stuck there. And if water quality degrades, they could be harmed.
So it seems to me like you're talking about situations where there's the habitat's not getting what it needs in the terms of flow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I've got a couple additional slides, and I'd like to have you use these to help us. These slides are data that are presented on Exhibit KT8, page 31 of the PDF that's not internally paginated. It's flow data. And we've just excised a couple of them out there for clarity. So if you can explain to us what's going on here on this slide.
Well, this is just an example from 2004. Our crews collect flow data every year in all the tributaries. And as you can see, in June, there's water in Stanshaw Creek. You see the left side there, that's Stanshaw Creek below the diversion, and then the right side is the diversion outflow before it goes into Irving Creek. And you can see in August, the flows are significantly lower than in early summer, and you don't see a lot of difference in the actual outflow to Irving Creek. So Stanshaw Creek is absorbing the flow impact with low flows in the late summer. And the bottom chart there is just Irving Creek measured above the diversion. So you can see that Irving Creek has quite a bit of water even in the late summer without the diversion inflow.
And can you help us explain? For the record, that this is a graphical summary of the data that we've seen in that exhibit KT8 related to Stanshaw Creek.
So what you see here is a series of 4 years of flow data. The blue line is 2005. That was a relatively wet year. That's the lighter blue. The darker blue color is 2002, and that's a severe drought year. And you see in the beginning of the summer, flows are relatively high, and then except during the drought year, and then as summer progresses, the flows just all pretty much bottom out at a very low level. In this case, it's all less than 1 CFS. But note that the blue line from 2002, during a drought year, the flows in Stanshaw Creek were extremely low, even early in the summer. So this is a chart of T Creek. T Creek is a few miles upstream of Stanshaw Creek, and it's roughly the same size as Stanshaw Creek. And you can see it kind of has the same pattern in the early part of summer, but then in the late summer, there's quite a bit of variation in flows. You'll see higher flows in some years, like the wet year I pointed out, 2005, and even in the dry year of 2002, there was higher flows in the early part of the summer. So you see an actual spread in flows, of a couple CFS, which is normal. We have a very diverse climate.
Okay, and so is this, you mentioned two types of impairments that are created by lack of flows. Can you talk about what these slides help illustrate?
Well, the slides illustrate that whether it's a drought year or a wet year, Stanchaw Creek is impacted by flow every year.
Okay. I have some additional time from both my opening statement and my first witness that I would like to try to use some of that now, as other parties have, in order to finish my testimony with presenting testimony of Todd Soto.
So how much time is remaining and how much time do you need?
I have 8 minutes and 54 seconds left from the opening statement and 6.5 minutes left from Mr. Hillman.
Okay.
So that sounds like about 14 minutes, and I would say with Mr. Soto, we could probably be done in 5.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, another harm that you mentioned was the potential for fish to be trapped in a cold water refugia during the summer if there's not a significant flow for connectivity with the river. So can you tell us about, I'll represent, these are slides from exhibit, that are from exhibit KT5. They're photographs that Mr. Soto took or was present while they were taken, and of a date in, I don't remember the exact date right off the top of my head, but in 2009. So can you walk us through this? If you need me to move a slide, go ahead and let me know.
Okay, well, this is actually a photo one of my technicians took of me standing next to the off-channel pond in 2000, I believe it was 2009, sometime late July 2009, and we were there upon request from, I believe it was Conrad Fisher, called me and told me that he was concerned that there was a fish kill going on in Stanchaw Creek at the time, so we came down to look at it. So this is a photo that I took, an up-close photo of the same site during the same time, and this is the off-channel pond during a condition when the water quality was extremely poor, and we observed some dead fish that day.
What lets you know that the water quality is extremely poor?
Well, when we arrived on site, I noted that there was a lot of algae and looked like basically gas bubbles on the surface, and it looked like the pond was actually starting to fill again. There was debris on the pond, and then we found some dead salmonids in the pond.
So what do we have here?
That is a dead coho salmon.
And who took this photograph?
I did.
And how do you know it's a coho salmon?
Well, there's a number of ways to tell, but from this photo, you can see that the par marks are narrow. You can also see that the fins are a little kind of orangish color. If we were to look a little closer, you'd see that there's no spots on the dorsal fin. That's an indication whether it's a coho or a steelhead. And then the anal fin has a sickle shape.
And how about this?
That's the same fish that was when I first walked up to the pool and was floating in the margin of the pool.
And what does this show us? What did you want to tell us about this one?
So this kind of shows the head cut that the creek, well, first of all, it shows that there's very little water going into the creek at that time. But there's also a head cut forming there, which is an indication that, and then you also see the lateral cut. So that was the pond elevation at some point previous. But when you have a rapid decline in surface elevation of a pond or a reservoir, you can expect the banks to slough and the inflow delta to head cut. So that's an indication that there was a rapid decrease in pond elevation.
All right, well, that looks like all the slides we have. In your opinion, would eliminating the diversion on Stanshot Creek from Marble Mountain Ranch prevent the harms that you've observed and that we've talked about today?
Yes.
And would imposing conditions recommended by National Marine Fisheries Service on the diversion prevent the harms that you observed?
I believe so.
And would imposing the conditions recommended by California Department of Fish and Wildlife prevent the harms that you observed?
Yes.
Okay, looks like I made it under 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. At this time, I would offer the witness to be cross-examined by first the prosecution team, Division of Water Rights.
So, Mr. Soto, thank you for coming. And I wanted to bring up number WR87. Oh. And then page 19. So this is the Division of Water Rights Inspection Report. Mr. Soto, did you take this photo?
I did.
Did you take this second photo?
I took that one as well.
Okay. And did you provide these photos to division staff?
Yes, I did. Skylar, I believe.
Okay, that's Skylar Anderson?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you previously testified that you could identify the fish in the photo. And did you, following the meeting in Orleans in December 2014, did you correspond with, Mr. Anderson regarding, fish kills and conditions in Stanshot Creek?
Yeah, I believe it was 2015 at some
Okay.
point when we
All right.
corresponded.
And did you provide him with, additional information?
I provided him with these photos.
Okay. Yeah. I apologize. The mouse is being difficult. Can we pause the clock? Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. All right. Is this an email you sent to Mr. Anderson? Or rather to Mr. Williams at the water boards?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And is this an email that you sent to Mr. Anderson?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'll note for the record, this is Exhibit WR93.
Thank you. And I believe the prior email I asked about was Exhibit WR74. And this is Exhibit WR96. Mr. Soto, did you send this email to Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is WR97. Mr. Soto, did you send this email to Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
And, you know, this looks like an email chain. Did you send these other emails in the chain?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I should probably scroll through the rest of it so you can see it. And where the emails indicating they came from you did come from you.
Yes, they did.
Okay. Thank you. And let's see, we're at. And did you send this email to Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll note for the record, this is Exhibit WR103.
Thank you. I apologize for my absent-mindedness. And I think the next one is number 148. Did you send this email to Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
And this email indicates it includes attached, information, spreadsheets, stream gauging. You attach that information?
Yes.
Okay. And this is exhibit number 188, WR 188. This is this looks like an email from Leroy Sear at the Forest Service. Do you recognize this email?
Yes.
Okay. And I think the next one is 190. Was this an email that you sent to
Yes, it is.
Mr. Filer?
Yes.
And these attachments, this was attached data you included.
Yes, it is.
Can you maybe explain what some of these attachments are, since the file extension names may appear unfamiliar?
Yeah, those are data from temperature loggers that were deployed in Stanshaw Creek.
Okay, and is that like raw data, basically?
Yeah, it's raw.
I'm probably not using the correct term, but so, Mr. Soto, do you recall this graph?
Yes, that's the graph that Stormer presented.
And do you remember, did you discuss this graph with him?
No.
No, you didn't. Do you know how, do you do you know what data he used to create this graph?
I am not sure if it was our data or it was Leroy Sear's data.
Okay. Can you talk about the kinds of data collection tools used for flow and temperature in Stanshaw?
Well, we measure flow with a SWRCB flow velocity meter, and then we do some calculations using a tape and come up with flow that way. Temperature data is collected with, we call them hobo temps is kind of like a general term for them, but they're basically temperature loggers that are set to record temperature hourly. And they're put in a metal case and attached to a cable and deployed into the stream.
Can you talk about what parts of the stream they're in?
I believe this one, well, I don't know where Leroy Sayre put his
Okay.
loggers, but we attached ours to either a tree or I think in some cases there was a staff gauge there. We attached it to that and placed the logger in the pool, or if it was in the creek, we would put it in the, attach it to some kind of hard point like a root or a tree. So when the winter flows came, they didn't get lost or somebody didn't run off with them.
Okay, if you saw this kind of, the type of temperature change indicated on this graph, what kind of inferences might you draw from it?
When I look at that, that's an indication that the logger was exposed to the air.
Okay, and why would it get so hot?
It got so hot because the flows dropped and the logger was exposed to the air. The air temperatures in the Mid-Klamath routinely exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, sorry.
Okay.
Council, can we identify this exhibit before you move off it?
This is exhibit WR191. So this is exhibit WR190, and is this 2000? Do the attachments here include 2009 data?
It appears they do, yeah.
Okay. And would this graph appear to reflect that 2009 data?
Yes,
Okay. Fairly accurately?
I think so.
Okay. Mr. Soto, do you recall the Stanshaw Creek restoration project? I think this particular project?
Yes, I was involved with that project.
Okay, that was actually probably my next question. Can you talk about this project a little bit? Why it was necessary, what it accomplished?
Yeah, we worked with the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council to implement this project, and the project was really designed to excavate the sediment out of the pool and basically make the pool volume larger. It was following some years where we'd observed these fish kills, and we were concerned that the pool was trapping fish and fish were dying. So we figured that if we expand the volume of the pool, then we'd make the pool more resilient. So we do these kind of projects all over the place. This is one of a number of projects that we implemented during that time frame.
Okay, and what was the time frame of this project?
I believe this was 2013 or maybe 14 when it was implemented. I don't recall exactly.
Okay, so the project description indicates that, I will highlight that portion. Okay, can you read that highlighted portion?
I'll note for the record that this is exhibit WR184.
And I believe we are on page 4.
Okay. So this project successfully restored approximately 4,500 square feet of high-quality coho rearing habitat at the mouth of Stanshaw Creek, latitude 41.477, longitude 123.512. Approximately 560 cubic yards of gravel and rock were removed from the head of an existing pool, restoring and enhancing the pre-2006 form and function of this heavily utilized off-channel rearing habitat originating from Stanshaw Creek. The bulk of the sediment plug was deposited during the 2005-2006 flood event when the upstream ditch diversion to Marble Mountain Ranch overtopped, causing severe gully erosion.
So that's something that would have occurred within the last 20 years?
Yes.
And do you agree with that description
Yes.
of the project? Okay. I think the next exhibit I'd like to ask you about is WR40. Okay, this is exhibit WR40. This is a field report from a state water board inspection conducted in July of 2000.
For the record, they spelled my name wrong.
You know what? I was going to ask you that. I think they spell your name as Todd in this report, and that is an incorrect spelling. Thank you. Is this you in the photo?
That is.
And are you also in this photo?
I was much younger then, but yeah, I think that's me.
Okay. So you were involved in this Stanshaw Creek process even then?
Yes, I was.
Yes. Okay. And those are our questions for Mr. Soto.
All right, thank you. Ms. Brenner, do you have some questions for Mr. Soto?
Good morning, Mr. Soto.
Good morning.
Just a clarification, is Ty Creek upstream or downstream from the Stanshaw Creek?
T Creek is upstream of
Creek.
Stanshaw Creek, yes.
Is there another name for it? Does it have a longer name?
That's it, T.
Does it have any thermal refuge pools in it?
It has a thermal refuge at the confluence of T Creek, and then at the lower part of T Creek is thermal refuge, but it doesn't have an off-channel pond.
So there was an exhibit that you used that showed the different pools along the Klamath, and that wasn't listed there?
No, we didn't detect any coho or didn't recapture any of the Shasta River coho at T Creek.
Okay. Mr. Petrozelli discussed with you just a minute ago Exhibit WR 190. Do you recall that? Just a few minutes ago.
Remind me which one that was.
That was Mr. Filer's graph of the 2009
Yeah.
temperature data. And 191 was the graph. And you're not sure what data he used to produce that graph, correct?
I don't know which data he used.
Okay. Were you here when Mr. Filer testified as to his interpretation of that data?
Yes.
Did you understand Mr. Filer to indicate that data, his interpretation of that data was that the pond temperature was actually 106 degrees?
Yeah, I recall that.
Do you agree with that assessment of the data?
No,
That was the ambient air temperature?
that's the only thing it could have been.
Okay. I'd like to go through some of the data that you've presented. Exhibits KR6 and KR8. And the temperature data the prosecution team included in WR190. Is it possible that we can provide Mr. Soto those sets of data? Yes. Mr. Hunt, can we provide those exhibits, or we're certainly
I'm sorry, like, in what way? Do you
just
know-
hand them to him so
I
that
don't
he
have
has
it.
them?
I don't have it printed out. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sure, hand it to him. That's fine. Is it possible to put this on the screen while we go through it so that we can all follow along?
I think that if you can certainly try, but because it's so many sheets of data, it's going to be difficult to put it up on the screen. It's just the same indication that I went through with Mr. Kramer.
Okay.
It's interpretation of the data. You're certainly welcome to have him put it up on the screen, but to flip through the pages of data is going to be difficult.
I understand. I'm going to grab my computer so that at least I can keep it in front of myself.
Okay.
What are the numbers?
KR6, KR8,
It might be KT, sorry, just, it's okay.
KT,
Yeah,
sorry,
no problem.
Those are the only two, KT6 and KT8?
KT6, KT8, and WR190. Mr. Soto, is Exhibit KR6 data describing observations of fish in specific areas of the Klamath Basin from 2002 to 2012?
This one here.
That-
Yeah, those are presence absence surveys that we conduct, and
And they include Stanshaw Creek, correct?
yes.
Okay. And so I'm going to focus on the Stanshaw Creek data,
Okay.
okay? And KT8 is flow data for mid-Klamath tributaries from 96 through 2012, including Stanshaw?
Yeah.
That's correct. And prosecution team exhibit WR190 is temperature data you provided to Mr. Filer for the Stanshaw pool. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I provided this data or this is Mr. Sears' data.
Okay. Are you familiar with that data?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to focus for a moment on which data is this coming from? Six. Look at Exhibit 6, KT6.
Okay.
And do you see the date 7/8/2008?
Yes.
What's the number of coho at that time observed?
In Stanshaw Creek, it looks like there was 130 coho observed that day.
Anything else observed that day with regard to fishery resources?
In the notes, there were 86 juvenile Chinook, 336 juvenile steelhead, and 35 Chinook observed in the Klamath.
And what were those 35 Chinook in the Klamath?
It says 35 Chinook in the Klamath were observed with very distended stomachs. That's what it says in there.
What's that mean when a fish has a distended stomach?
Well, that typically means it has clinical signs of Ceratомyxa shasta, which is a disease that affects salmons in the Klamath River.
So they're diseased. They have a disease. They're not doing well.
No.
And the next date, 7/13/2009. What was observed in that on that date with regard to fishery resources?
Looks like no coho, 179 juvenile steelhead and 1 juvenile Chinook were seen.
How about 7/20/2010?
In Stanchaw Creek, there were 55 coho observed, and in the notes it says 66 steelhead were observed.
And how about 2011?
There were 17 coho observed, and in the notes it says 15 juvenile steelhead, 4 juvenile Chinook, 30 shiner, 3 sunfish, 1 juvenile steelhead, and 1 juvenile coho mortality.
Okay. This is the confluence. Okay. So, also on 7/8/2008, at the Stanchock confluence, were data collected at that point as well?
So that's the confluence where Stanchaw Creek meets the Klamath River, and looks like there were 502 juvenile Chinook and 3 juvenile steelhead observed at that location.
And again on 7/13/09. What's the observation notes on that date?
So in Stanchaw Creek, there were 179 juvenile steelhead and 1 juvenile Chinook. In the Stanchaw confluence, it says that Stanchaw doesn't make it all the way to the Klamath River, goes underground 30 feet from the Klamath. Only 35 shiner were seen at the mouth.
Okay. So that's an instance when the fish in the Stanchaw Pond are trapped. There's no connectivity, correct?
That's what it indicates, yes.
Okay, but there are fish in the pond,
Yes,
and that's July 13th, 2009.
yes.
What about July 20th, 2010?
So July 20th, 2010, there were 55 coho observed in the pond or in Stanchaw Creek. I think it's important to note that these counts include the creek and the pond. 66 juvenile steelhead were observed.
I'm actually looking at the Stanchaw confluence.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I wasn't clear. That's my
Okay.
fault.
Okay, so there were 8 juvenile coho observed in the confluence, and then in the notes it says there was 4 juvenile steelhead and 2 juvenile Chinook observed.
And how about again on 8/30/2011 at the confluence?
There were 0 coho observed and 1 juvenile steelhead, 2 juvenile Chinook, and 20 shiner observed.
Okay. And so now let's go to the Exhibit 8, Karuk Tribe Exhibit 8, and that's the flow data for Stanchaw Creek. Is that correct?
This, what I'm looking at is Stanchaw Creek diversion at the outflow, 2000.
So tell me what is that data? Is that flow data for Stanchaw Creek Marble Mountain Ranch diversion?
Yes.
But where's the measures taken?
The measures are taken, basically there's an access road that goes to Irving Creek, and Stanchaw diversion crosses that. So it's right before the outflow, or it is the outflow to Irving Creek. So I saw some pictures earlier of a big head cut. It's right above that, and it's right where the diversion outflow crosses the road.
Okay. And on 6/24/08, what was the CFS at that point?
624. Did you say 08?
Yes.
The data I'm looking at, I don't have an 08. Unless, oh, okay, it's the next page, I guess, here. So 6/24/08 at crossing of track at Irving Creek directly in diversion, the flow was measured at 1.8 CFS.
How about 7/31/2008?
The flow measured at that location was 1.7.
How about 7/1/2009?
Flow was measured at 1.8.
Okay. Now I want to direct you to the flow data for Stanshaw Creek confluence taken in various areas near Highway 96.
Okay.
What is that?
Sorry. You said Stanshaw Creek confluence. I don't know that. Maybe you'll get there, but I'm not sure that that's exactly what this is describing. If you're talking about below Highway 96.
That's what I'm going to ask.
Okay.
Where's that data taken from? I don't.
Okay, sorry.
So you're asking me where the data is collected.
Mm-hmm.
So the data is collected, well, at least our crews collect the data in the same location. It's just above Highway 96, below Stanshaw Creek diversion.
Okay. So on 6/24/2008, what was the flow at that point?
On 6/24/2008, 100 feet upstream of Highway 96 road crossing, the flow was 1.9.
And how about on 7/31/2008?
On 7/31, it was 1.1.
And on July 1, 2009, what was the flow?
.5.
How about 7/13/2010?
.4.
Now I want you to take a look at Prosecution Team Exhibit 190. Is that temperature data?
This, yes.
Okay, and that's temperature data by the hour, is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. So again, can you take a look at 6/24/08? And in that 24-hour period, what was the highest temperature?
6/24/08.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at 2009.
Can I help him find it? Do you
Oh
mind?
yeah, you can help him.
Oh, is it?
Probably off the tabs in the
Okay.
in the back here. Here, take the clip off so it's easier.
Yeah, you can.
Apologize. I don't think I tagged the right.
Oh, you have,
Is it okay if Carrie helps him out?
I'm fine. I want to get out of here as fast as we all can.
I apologize.
If folks could be careful not to bump the microphone, it's very hard on our court reporter.
It's a lot of data.
Yeah. Okay, so
62408. Could you just take a look at that hourly temperature data and let me know what you see as the highest temperature?
so it looks like it was on 6/24/08 at 2100 hours, I believe. It was 58.066.
I'm not good at military time. What do you know what time 2100 hours is?
I believe it's like 3 o'clock or something. No. Is that 9 p.m.?
It's 9 p.m., isn't it?
I thought you said you weren't good at it. Are you trying to trick my witness here?
I just think it's curious that the temperature was high at the nighttime.
Yeah, that is odd.
Isn't that odd? How about 7/8/2008?
7/8.
Same exercise. Just take a look at the different hourly measurements of temperature. And I'll just suggest to you that 1900 hours, 2010, 21,
So can you repeat the time you're on 7/8?
7/8/2008. If you take a look at those hourly data logs, temperatures, you'll see that a pattern here.
Yeah, this I can explain probably the error here is when they downloaded or when they launched the logger, whoever did this, their clock was likely wrong on their computer when they did that. So that's
So you
this
think
is this is raw data, so that can be corrected.
so you don't think that the highest temperatures were at these time periods?
It wouldn't make any sense.
Nonetheless, what is the highest temperature during that particular date?
On 7/8,
08.
looks like it's without going to the tenths. It's 63 and
Could you use units, please?
63 Fahrenheit.
If you take a look at 2010 or 1910, I think it's actually 64 degrees.
Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, 64 degrees.
Okay. One more, bear with me. 7/1/2009. We like 2009. That's actually tabbed. And outside of the time period when the temperature probe
2009.
was exposed to the ambient air.
He's still looking, sorry. I think it'd be better if you
Okay.
wait.
It's actually tabbed.
Okay, I got it now.
Okay, so we note that there was on the 1500 hour, it's the 106.9 that we've already discussed, correct? 106.9 Fahrenheit.
Yeah. Yes.
And that was as a result of the logger being exposed to the ambient air temperature?
That's the only explanation I can think of.
Right. That wouldn't be the pond temperature.
No.
Does it get 107 degrees out there?
Yes.
So outside of that and the 1600 hours at 104 and 1700, 101, 1800 to 95. Prior to that 106 temperature, what was the highest temperature logged between 0.10 and 1400 hours military time?
Looks like it was 63.
Okay. And you weren't at the pond on July 1, 2009, were you?
No.
But if the temperature of the pond had gotten as high as 100 degrees, we would have found all fishery resources would have died.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to the restoration effort that you discussed earlier. Which exhibit is that? That's okay. Do you know, you know, go ahead. I think it's WR 184, is that correct? Can we pull that back up? It's the 180, is that 184? That must not be the right. You know, scroll down. Thanks, Ken.
There we go.
So if you go to the project description again, page 4. And you read that into the record earlier this morning, correct?
Correct.
The project description. And a part of that project description is that the Stanshaw Creek pool is heavily utilized, heavily used.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Means fish use it heavily. That's a very vague term.
Okay. You also indicated that the 2006 there was a Marble Ranch ditch overtopping due to a flood event.
Correct.
Objection. I'm not sure that Mr. Soto indicated that.
Is that your understanding, Mr. Soto?
I understand there was a flood.
Do you know if there was a
I'm going to overrule the objection because we're continuing with the line of questioning, but I'll hold it in consideration. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of an overtopping by the Marble Mountain Ranch ditch in 2006?
I was not there during the flood, so I didn't observe it.
Okay. When you have a flood event on Stanshaw or another similar, like, was it Ty Creek, T Creek?
T Creek.
I have a hard time with that. T-I, it seems like Ty to me. On T Creek, what do you have sediment outfall from those creek systems during those flood events?
Yes, we do.
Do you have quite a bit of sediment outfall?
Yes.
Does this enhancement project involve moving rocks to direct the flow into Stanshaw floodplain?
Not this particular enhancement project.
Are you aware of rocks being moved in the last year, in the Stanshaw floodplain?
Yes, I am.
Do you know who's doing that?
The Middle Klamath Watershed Council has a contract with Pacific Corps. Well, it's actually with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, funded through Pacific Corps, to do creek mouth enhancement on all creeks along the Mid-Klamath River to enhance fish passage during the summer for these juvenile fish to easily access refuge.
So it's your understanding that the movement of the rocks along the Stanshaw system is to enhance connectivity between Stanshaw Creek and Klamath River?
Yes, that's the intent of the project.
Is this Exhibit 93? Where's our photo? Can we take a look at MMR, Exhibit MMR 21? You can direct this.
Okay. Yeah, 21.
Or I can pull it up. Pull that up and go to the photo. Were you in here when Mr. Kramer testified?
Yes, I was.
And so you're familiar, did you see the photos that were put up while Mr. Kramer was visiting the site?
Yes, I saw them.
So this is one of the photos, that's MMR 21, page 14. Do you recognize that as the Stanshaw Creek Pond area?
Well, you can, I guess that's the pond behind the man standing there, and this looks like the creek entering the pond.
And are those hand-placed rocks along that creek?
It looks like there's some hand-placed rocks on the left side of the photo.
And are those to direct the water into the pond?
It's to direct some of the water into the pond.
Are you aware of who placed those rocks?
I believe this project was part of a, well, I think McWick did it. Specifically, this activity was done during a restoration raft trip where they took a group of, I think it might have been Friends of the River or some group to do some of this stuff, to do some kind of team building thing. So yeah, I'm aware of this.
You go to the next photo. Do you recognize this photo?
It looks like the same location, but I didn't see the step pools in the first photo, so it may have been taken at a different time.
Do you recognize that as the Stanshaw Creek into the pond?
Yeah, that's the inflow to the pond.
Can the fish get out of that system the way it's currently configured?
Yeah, these are step pools. They're typically designed to create little resting areas. And if you look at the photo, you'll see small gaps between the rocks. And keep in mind, we're talking about fish that are in the 50 millimeter to 100 millimeter size, so they're roughly fingerlings.
Mm-hmm. So this is allowing the fish to go in and out of the pond into the creek, not into the confluence of the Klamath.
Yeah, this is to allow fish to move upstream into the creek.
Go to the next.
Could you just say what page that was for the record?
That's page 15.
Thank you.
And page 16. Do you recognize this area of the Stanshaw Creek?
Yes, this looks like the confluence of Stanshaw Creek with the Klamath River.
Does that express a connectivity at the point of Stanshaw Creek and Klamath?
This photo is really difficult to determine that, but I can see that there's water spilling out from the creek, so it's much different than what I described as being disconnected when there's no water flowing out of the creek into the river. I can't make a judgment whether this is passable for fish or not.
Do you know whether those rocks were placed there?
Not all of them. I'm sure it looks like over on the kind of upper left side of the photo, some of the rocks look like they're placed, but there's a lot of rocks there. I don't think that they were all placed.
Do you think the rocks that were placed there were to increase connectivity?
I think the attempt there was to make step pools from the pond down to the Klamath River to improve fish passage.
Okay. Maybe you don't believe that those rocks block fish passage out of the pool?
From this photo, it doesn't appear so.
Okay. Let's go back to July 2009, when you observed that one dead juvenile coho. Do you have a date of that event? Do you know what date that actually occurred?
I think it was July 20th, and it was later July. I may have indicated in that email to Skylar the exact date. It wasn't early July. It was late July.
Any idea what the temperature was at that time?
I do not know the temperature that day. We had a temperature logger in the pond at the time, but then that winter it got buried by sediment and we weren't able to retrieve it.
Okay. So the temperature data, you recall, ended sometime early July?
I don't know when the temperature data ended.
Did you provide all temperature data that you have in your possession to the State Water Resource Control Board?
I provided everything I could find, yes.
Okay. Do you know the actual cause of the fish death?
I believe it was temperature shock at the time, but there are other issues with temperature. You can have crashes in water quality, such as dissolved oxygen, things like that are related to temperature.
Could you have a diseased fish from the Klamath River?
You could have diseased fish.
And the Klamath's known to have diseased fish?
It's known to have diseased fish, primarily Chinook salmon.
Do you have an idea how many juvenile salmon and steelhead were in the pond at that time? Did you observe fish when you found other fish in the pond at the time?
I saw a couple what I thought were dead steelhead in the pond that were actually on the bottom of the pond, but I didn't dive the pond and get wet.
So you didn't look for any other fish?
No.
Other than temperature, what are the other factors that can reduce a habitat's desirability for rearing coho habitat?
Well, if there's no cover, they're subject to predators. For coho, they specifically require velocities that are less than 1 foot per second. So you need low velocity water. Sometimes there's a lack of food, but I think for thermal refugia, the two main requirements are temperature and velocity.
Human visitation have any impact?
I would say it's not really an impact. when humans get in the water, they usually stir up the water column and cause the fish to actually come out and feed because there's food that's kicked up from the bottom. My experience from diving with coho is that they actually don't exhibit a lot of harm from snorkeling with them.
How about other activities?
Well, other activities such as like suction dredge mining or something like that, yes.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the 2013 pool restoration. Do you have a sense of the season that the fish enter the pool?
Well, there's 3 times a year that the fish typically enter the pool, and I kind of showed that in my chart. In the spring, when the Klamath's flooded, the fry will enter the pool, basically because it's a nice low-velocity off-channel habitat. And then in the early part of summer, fish will enter the pool to seek thermal refugia. And then in the wintertime, during the fall redistribution, fish will enter the pool to seek winter refuge.
Was fish abundance in the pool estimated immediately before or after the restoration?
I don't recall if fish abundance was measured that year. There may have been some dives. I mean, if there were, they might be documented on this spreadsheet, but I don't know of any specific data that was collected.
Did the Karuk tribe perform the follow-up estimates of fish abundance the report indicates?
We attempted to do some population estimates, and I don't recall when or what that data said. I know we did population estimates when we were working with Sherry Whitmore there, but we did do these presence-absence surveys, which I'll note that they're not population estimates, they're presence-absence surveys. So to do a population estimate in a thermal refugia, our methods are we would go out and do a multiple dive survey. For example, when we did our research at other thermal refugias, our crews would dive starting at 7 in the morning and dive every hour till 7 in the evening, and then use an entire 12-hour observation to come up with a population estimate. And that was, I'll also note that was done in the midsummer, but when the temperatures cool in these areas, especially these off-channel ponds where there's high abundance of cover, it's really difficult to observe fish, especially when temperatures drop. Fish are not as active, so we rely on other methods such as a mark and recapture.
Okay, so you don't recall any data being provided regarding fish abundance before or after the restoration period to the State Water Board or to anybody else?
There may have been, but that would have been, I think, some data that possibly MCWIC would have collected by doing snorkel surveys.
Okay. You said done in midsummer. I didn't follow what you meant by that. What was done in midsummer?
I was just going to say that this whatever exhibit this is these are surveys that were done in the midsummer to do presence absence of fish.
Okay.
Should we identify what exhibit he held up so that we know?
Yeah, that would
he's
be a good
talking
idea.
about? Okay.
That exhibit should be marked, so if you can go to the first page.
Exhibit 6.
KT6.
KT6. As part of the restoration effort, the report notes that during the 6-day construction period, approximately 0.24 CFS of flow was piped into the pool. Do you recall that?
Objection. I
don't know that we've established the report says that.
Can you respond to the objection? Is there another way you can ask
We
the
can,
question?
we can go through the report and find the information if he doesn't recall.
Yeah, I'm having trouble piping into the pool. We had to clear fish out of a channel during the restoration effort. So our task was to basically, as the channel was dried up, we used little small dip nets to capture juvenile steelhead and salamanders and other macroinvertebrates that were stranded as part of our agreement with the state to do the project.
So can you take a look at what Carrie's pulled up? Is that,
Okay, yeah, I see that.
that's. So that's WR 184, exhibit WR 184 at page
Okay, yeah, I see
11. So does that refresh your recollection?
that. Oh, yeah, it does now, thank you.
Okay. So a flow of about 2.24 CFS was piped into the pool during your construction period, correct?
Correct.
Do you know how the fish and water quality of the pool impacted during that time?
I don't know how the water quality of the pool was impacted at that time. We put a curtain between our construction area and the upper part of the pool to block sediment from impacting the fish that were already in the pool while we did our construction. And then this pipe was used to transport water from the creek to the pool while we worked on where we had put a bunch of wood in the kind of in the inlet channel. So we had to dewater the inlet channel. So this was a diversion, a temporary diversion, while we did our construction.
You don't know what the temperature of the water did change or fluctuate during that time period?
I don't recall that.
You didn't monitor that?
We may have, but I don't recall what it was.
Okay. Have you observed disease, dying, or dead fish in any of the other cold water refuges along the Klamath River?
Yes, I have.
And is that a result of increased temperatures?
Well, temperature is definitely an influence, as the fish are, at least for the fish that I described earlier that were infected with the Ceratomyxa shasta. Typically, those fish are infected in the upper reach of the Klamath River, and it's the life cycle of sea shasta is influenced by temperature, and the severity of infection and the prevalence of infection increases as the water temperature increases.
Have you participated in rescue operations for juvenile salmon trapped in pools of water that were near going dry along the Klamath?
Yes.
Have you heard of such rescue actions taken by others in the Klamath Basin?
Yes.
Could you describe some of those? Or at least one of those efforts?
One of the efforts, well, there's been a lot of efforts, but I can give you a couple examples. I think it was 2001 along the main stem Klamath River near Independence Creek. A colleague and I were observing the river, and we saw an off-channel pond pool that was along the floodplain. We noticed fish in there, and the main stem Klamath was dropping. I'll note that it was before the Pacific Corps had ramping rates that were prescribed under the biological opinion. So we took action with the Yurok tribe to rescue those fish and relocate them off the floodplain and back into the river.
Okay. Your testimony indicated that Marble Mountain voluntarily reduced their diversions during the droughts of 15 and 16, and you observed no fish kills during that time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you observe fish kills in other areas along the Klamath in those years?
In 2015, I observed juvenile fish that were infected with Ceratomixa shasta at refuges, and these are refuges at creek confluences along the Klamath River. Yes.
Do you know do you have any indication of the fish abundance in the Stanshaw Creek Pond in 2015 and 16?
Not offhand. I would have to look at our data or find whatever data is available. I believe the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, since that was one of their project sites, has followed up with snorkel surveys during the summer, but I don't know what that data looks like off the top of my head.
Okay. Your testimony indicates that these thermal refugia are dynamic physically. Is that fair?
Yes.
So these areas, these refugia, they change year by year. Is that correct?
They can. That's correct.
Sometimes they're good fish habitats, sometimes they're not.
Sometimes they're better than others. I kind of describe them as a string of light bulbs, and sometimes they're a little brighter and sometimes they're dim.
If you didn't have the manipulation of the rocks along the Stanshaw Pool, what would occur with the Stanshaw Creek water?
Well, the Stanshaw Creek being one of those dynamic areas, it has an alluvial delta, and this is typical of most tributaries that empty onto a floodplain. You'll have an alluvial fan, which is composed of gravel. The creek hits the alluvial fan and braids into multiple channels, and those multiple channels can feed off-channel pools like Stanshaw Creek, and sometimes you'll have up to a dozen channels that will spread out all over the floodplain, and typically that's a good thing because it increases the cold water signal along the Klamath margin, so juveniles are more apt to find the refuge.
So why would you place rocks in that floodplain then?
I think rocks were placed in Stanshaw Creek specifically to increase the amount of flow reaching the pond to ensure that the pond was full or in good condition.
Okay. Do you recall in your testimony that you state that there's no tributaries feeding the Stanshaw Creek system below the Marble Mountain Ranch point of diversion?
Yes.
Are you aware of Mr. Fisher's diversion of water from a tributary downstream from the Marble Mountain Ranch point of diversion?
I am aware of his diversion. I was not aware that it came from a tributary. I thought it, at least from my experience walking up there, I thought it was just a pipe in the creek.
So he has a pipe in the Klamath or in the Stanshaw Creek collecting water.
He did probably 5 or 6 years ago when I observed that. I haven't been up there in a long time. I don't really know what his system looks like now.
You haven't been up the Stanshaw Creek in a long time?
I haven't been up above the Highway 96 crossing where his inlet for his pipe has been in at least 5 years.
Okay. Is where he diverts water in Stanshaw Creek close to the refuge pond?
Not really. It's probably a half mile upriver. I mean, up the creek.
Okay.
Or maybe less than that.
Are you aware of other subterranean contributions to the Stanchion Creek below the Marble Mountain Ranch point of diversion?
You mean springs that might feed the creek?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing really obvious. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some seepage that comes from the ditch that returns back to the creek. I'm sure that must be occurring.
How about seepage along the creek bed and banks itself?
I'm not aware of any springs that do that.
Are you aware of whether Mr. Fisher stacks rocks at Stanshaw Creek around the Refugia pool area?
I am not aware of what he does.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you. Next, does National Marine Fisheries Service have any questions for Mr. Soto?
We ready? Good morning. Are you aware of a fish kill that happened in the Klamath system in 2002?
Yes.
Do you know where in the system that happened?
The fish kill was concentrated in the lower Klamath River, primarily from Blue Creek down to the confluence of the Klamath River with the ocean.
So it was below Trinity,
Yes.
the confluence of Trinity and Klamath in the system.
Yes.
So it would be fair to conclude that nothing in the Stanshaw Creek system had anything to do with that fish kill.
No.
Are you aware of a report generated by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife analyzing the causes of that fish kill?
Yes.
Do you recall the conclusions in that report?
They concluded that the fish kill was caused by a fish disease commonly known as ick, and it was a result of low flows released from the Klamath Project. Specifically, ick is a density dependent type of fish disease. So the fish were basically trapped in the lower Klamath and were not able to migrate, and the densities were as such that ick was able to spread rapidly among the population and killed the salmon.
Was C. Shasta another pathogen that killed the fish?
For the 2002 fish kill, this was an adult kill. So while some of the fish may have been infected with Ceratamixa shasta, it was not the primary cause of the fish kill.
Are any of the pathogens that were involved in killing those fish, strike that, among the pathogens involved in that fish kill, are any of them enhanced? Is their life cycle, their propagation enhanced by warm temperatures in the Klamath?
Yes, I should have mentioned that columnaris, which is it's commonly known as gill rot, and it's a bacterial infection that's found on the gills, and it's influenced by fish density, but also water temperatures. So when water temperatures are above 18 degrees columnaris begins to become a problem, and then it becomes more of a problem when water temperatures are above 20 C.
Can you specify the units?
Celsius.
If I represented to you that one of the conclusions of CDF&W was warm temperatures caused rapid amplification of the pathogens Ich and columnaris, which resulted in a fish kill of over 33,000 adult salmon and steelhead, would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
So given the foregoing, would you agree that it's fair to say that reduction of impairment of cold water flows and cold water refugia into the Klamath system, no matter where they occur, is critical to the continued survival of coho in this system?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. Does the Department of Fish and Wildlife have some questions for Mr. Soto? Please approach.
Good morning, Mr. Soto. Thanks for sticking around for this fourth day. You stated earlier in your testimony that you visited Stanshaw Creek over 100 times over 17 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then in your testimony on page 3, and this is Karuk Tribe Exhibit 4, you state that the tributaries like Stanshaw are critical during summer months. Could you explain what you mean by this?
As critical, meaning that they provide cold water refuge, and the main stem Klamath is lethal much of the summer, so fish rely on the thermal refugia.
What approximately how many degrees in difference in temperature will you see between a tributary like Stanshaw Creek and the Klamath River?
Well, it can vary depending on the water year we have and the climate we have for that particular summer, but it can be as much as 10 degrees or it can be as much as 5 degrees Celsius. I think it was in summer 2015, temperatures in Orleans were roughly 27 degrees C, and temperatures in Stanshaw Creek were typically 17 degrees C.
So you could see 12 degrees Celsius or about 20 degrees Fahrenheit wouldn't be uncommon.
12 degrees would be extreme. It's usually around 10 on the extreme level.
So that's about 16, 18 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
You described thermal refugia in your testimony as a cold water patch in an otherwise warm water system, and that there are 3 different types of thermal refugia. What are these refugia types?
Well, these are generally, I mean, every refugia has unique value, but there's tributary confluences, which are basically just the cold water plume that is in the ambient river from the tributary. And then there's these tributary fed floodplain reaches, which are basically floodplain channels when formed by the Klamath River, but are fed by a cold water tributary. And then there's just the lower reach of the tributary itself.
And which of these 3 types of refugia does Stanshaw Creek provide?
Stanshaw Creek is a tributary fed floodplain type thermal refugia.
Does it also provide refugia in the tributary itself?
Yes.
And does it also provide refugia as a cold water plume in the main stem?
It does when there's flow reaching the main stem.
You were asked on across about the 2009 temperature graph in WR 191 exhibit. Do you recall that graph?
Yes.
You testified that the spike in temperature to 106.9 degrees Fahrenheit reflected a measurement of air temperature. Is that correct?
Yes.
What in your experience would cause such a spike indicating an air temperature reading?
I've seen that when a probe is basically exposed to the air, so it's usually when when water surface elevation drops below the actual probe.
When you have air temperatures over 100 degrees along the mid-Klamath River, do you see fish seeking thermal refugia in the main stem and tributaries?
During the latter mid part of summer, once the snow is melted, yes.
And then are the temperatures in a pool generally consistent throughout the pool's depth?
It can vary. In some locations, like in Syed Valley, where you have shallow groundwater, you can actually have stratification. But at Stanshaw Creek, there's really no groundwater connection in this pool, so it's dependent on the creek to maintain its depth. And if the depth of the pool is if it's not deep enough, then it won't stratify. So I mean, it can stratify if the pool's full and the depth is appropriate. So it just is, it's kind of a site by site thing.
Okay. We've heard talk from various witnesses talking about the relationship between flows and water temperatures. Are there other aspects of water quality that are affected by low flows?
I think temperature is probably the biggest aspect. I mean, when you have a lower volume of water and you have high temperatures, the stream will typically heat up quickly. So you'll end up with high temperatures during the day, and then, in fact, at night during the cooling period, you could get lower temperatures. You end up with more diurnal variation in your temperature when you have lower flows, which can be very stressful on fish because they're a cold water animal and they need to adjust their metabolic rate to that switch in temperature. So it's actually a really high cost to fish to be adjusting to changing temperatures.
So change in temperatures just even over the course of the day can have some detrimental impacts to fish.
Yeah, it can reduce their growth rates.
Were you here for Mr. Kramer's testimony on Monday?
I was.
Did you hear him suggesting that based on his single site visit in October of this year that 1 CFS would be sufficient to maintain the Stanshaw Creek pool?
He provided a lot of information, and he may have said that. I don't specifically recall that part of his testimony.
Okay.
I was focused on other stuff.
Have you reviewed the 2016 NMFS flow recommendation?
Yes.
And have you reviewed the 2015 Ross Taylor report?
Yes.
Just for the record, the NMFS flow recommendation is NMFS Exhibit 3, and the Ross Taylor flow report is at CDFW Exhibit 7. Based on your experience with Stanshaw Creek and your review of these reports, would you consider 1 CFS to be adequate for Stanshaw Creek to provide the various types of refugia we've been talking about?
No.
Have you observed any events in the past that might inform this view?
Well, I've observed the creek and the pond at flows less than 1 CFS, and typically the pond is disconnected from the main stem river at that flow.
Are there other water quality impacts such as algae growth or anything like that with lower flows?
Yes, you can have algae growing on the pond, and I think you can have temperature increases because of the the volume of the pond has been reduced.
Have you noted any dead salmonids in Stanshaw Creek prior to 2016?
Yes, I've seen them there.
What's your experience identifying juvenile salmonids?
I've been snorkeling and observing and identifying fish since 1994, so more than 20 years.
So you have over 20 years experience identifying these salmonids.
Yes.
Were you here for CDFW witness Jennifer Bull's testimony yesterday?
Yes.
Did you hear her relay the CDFW recommendation of a minimum of 2.5 CFS stream flow at the Highway 96 culverts for fish passage into Stanshaw Creek?
Yes.
What would you consider a necessary minimum in-stream flow to maintain fish passage into Stanshaw Creek?
I would say it's between 2 and 2.5.
This next question relates to some of the testimony of Mr. Kramer in MMR 17 and MMR 21, including some of the pictures you were shown during cross by Marble Mountain Ranch, related to the rocks placed near the pond entrance. Have you visited this off-channel pool recently?
Yes.
When was the last time you visited it?
Last Thursday.
So that was subsequent to Mr. Kramer's site visit in
Yes.
early October? Did you see the rock berms that Mr. Kramer thought were preventing the connection between the Klamath River and Stanshaw Creek?
Yes.
In your opinion, are these rock berms preventing a connection between the main stem Klamath and Stanshaw Creek?
No.
Would you expect as much of a need for such berms to enhance connectivity if there was a minimum in-stream flow of at least 2 to 2.5 CFS?
There may still be a need if we're in a severe drought. I mean, the place is dynamic, so if there's only 2 channels or 1 channel feeding the pond and the majority of the water is going into the Klamath, then it would be prudent to go out there and maximize the water flow into the pond as an enhancement thing. But in general, we wouldn't have to do that as much.
Okay. In Mr. Kramer's testimony on page 12 of MMR 17, he poses the question whether all coho that use Stanshaw Creek would be lost without the pool at Stanshaw Creek, and concluded that some, if not most, of the juvenile coho would have found other creeks. And yesterday we heard Ms. Whitmore testify that the movement of fish increases the risk of mortality. In your opinion, is it more likely than not that juvenile coho would perish or experience other detrimental effects if there was no Stanshaw Creek pool or access to that pool?
Well, maybe their exposure to warm temperatures would be longer, so there definitely would be an impact on coho, especially if they weren't able to locate one.
Would you expect this impact to vary depending in part on the river or water year conditions?
Yes.
Are you aware whether current overall juvenile coho numbers may be depressed?
I am aware they are currently depressed.
Just a few more questions. The NIMS flow recommendation, again, this is NIMS Exhibit 3, relies in part on gauged flows in T Creek to estimate Stanshaw Creek flows. And you discussed T Creek a little bit in your testimony. What's your familiarity with T Creek?
Well, I live at T-Bar Road, so I pretty much grew up along T Creek.
So you spent a lot of time there?
I've spent I probably spent more time at T Creek than Stanshaw.
Where is it located relative to Stanshaw Creek?
It's approximately 4 miles upriver.
In your experience, is it reasonable to rely on T Creek flow data as a surrogate for Stanshaw Creek flows in the NIMS analysis?
Yes.
During the cross-examination by Marble Mountain Ranch, you testified in reference to Karuk Exhibit 6 that Chinook observed in July 2008 with a distended stomach suggested the Chinook were diseased. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does thermal refugia help combat or minimize the risk of disease?
Yes, it does. I co-authored a paper that was recently published in the Journal of American Fisheries that showed that thermal refugia reduced the exposure time of Chinook to Ceratamixa spores.
So for Chinook, these are adult Chinook, is that correct?
These are juvenile Chinook
These are juvenile Chinook in the main stem?
in the main stem, correct?
And the thermal refugias are beneficial for these juvenile Chinook in the main stem as well?
Yes, they are.
One sec. No additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vogely. At this time, I'm going to call for a break. Mr. Soto, you've been here for a long time, so you might need a bio break or anything else. And counsel for Marble Mountain asked for a 10-minute break. Will that be sufficient?
Yes, that should be fine, thank you.
Okay, and then after that, if Old Man River Trust has questions for Mr. Soto? Oh, no, okay. You won't be, well, we'll see where we're at in terms of when we return. So we'll return at 11:42. Thank you. Okay, thanks. It's 11:43 by that clock, so it's been 11 minutes. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And at this point, I mentioned it before, but I wanted to give Old Man River Trust the opportunity to ask questions of the witness. No? Klamath River Keeper? California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance? Mr. Schutz, please come forward. And as he comes forward, I wanted to let folks know that I've decided that today we will have a 4:30 stop time instead of the 3:30 because I'm out of concern for making sure we complete these proceedings tomorrow. The goal of completing them on Friday, by Friday, it's my opinion that the 3:30 stop is a problem for that. So we're going to go to a 4:30 stop today. Mr. Schutz.
Good morning, Mr. Soto. I'm Chris Schutz with the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with ambient air temperature in the Salmon Bar area since you've lived in the area for a long time. You mentioned that air temperatures often exceed 100 degrees during the summer at Salmon Bar. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And is it also true that they often exceed 100 degrees in September?
They can. It's not as frequent as midsummer, but they can.
Okay. And what about in October?
Rarely, never. I mean, I've never seen temperatures like that. in October.
90 degrees in October?
Sometimes.
Okay. Could we pull up KT9 PDF page 21, please? And scroll down to the graph, please. Thank you. So this is a generalized view, sort of view of thermal patterns in the Klamath Basin. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
And I call your attention to the red dotted line and the area where it says high temperatures more or less directly above July 9th. Is it your experience that in some years the descending limb of that line would be moved over to the right so it would start later in the year than what's shown on this generalized graph?
Yeah. Typically, if it's a wet year with lots of snowpack, then the peak will happen later in the summer, because in the early part of summer you may still have 100-degree temperatures, but you're getting snow melt, so that buffers your temperature. But during drought cycles, the temperatures can peak as early as late June or early July. But on average, it's around the early part of August.
Okay, and is it common for there to be temperatures in excess of 20 degrees in the Klamath River after the 1st of September?
You can have temperatures higher than 20 degrees, but at that point you can still have really hot weather, but the angle of the sun is lower, the days are shorter, the nights are longer, so temperature starts to decline for that reason as well. So but 20 degrees is definitely something that you'll see in the main stem Klamath in early September.
Okay. Could we pull up KT8, please, and scroll the pages? Let's start with page 28. I'm going to have to look it off of here because I've lost it on my computer. So could we scroll down to, let's go to 29. And I'd like to look at the bottom of page 29, the dates 9 for 9/13. Could you read the sort of the bottom four lines in the column here from 9/13/11 and tell us what those say about the about the measured flow in Stanshaw Creek at different locations?
Are you talking about the column that is highlighted in blue that says directly in Stanshaw Creek just above diversion, directly in Stanshaw Creek below diversion by Highway 96?
Correct.
The third one down, directly in Stanshaw Creek below diversion by Highway 96, and then the last one is directly in Stanshaw Creek just below diversion.
Correct. So starting with the directly in Stanshaw Creek, just above the diversion, what's the value for September 13th?
3.2
And
What are the units?
CFS, cubic feet per second.
thank you. And just below the diversion, the next line down, please, same date.
0.6 CFS.
And there's another one directly below that. Would you read that for us, please?
0.7 CFS.
And can you explain to us why there might be a difference between those two readings on the same day?
Because they were measured in the same location, and measuring flow is not an exact science, so it can be off by maybe a tenth or a hundredth of a tenth. So they took two measurements there to come up with roughly the same thing.
Very good. And where it says just below diversion, on the bottom line on this page, what's the value there?
0.5 CFS.
And can you tell us, is that a different location than the line immediately above?
I believe the just below diversion, that's when they actually hiked up to the diversion and measured flow just below the diversion point.
So to within the bounds of accuracy of the measurement, the difference between those 2 points, if indeed there are different points, is how big?
Well, it's 2/10 and 1/10.
Okay, very good. And what kind of water year do you recall was 2011?
It was a wet year.
And so what we're seeing here, are we not, is that even in a wet year by the middle of September, the flow, considering the diversion at the Marble Mountain Ranch intake, the flow at the lower end of Stanshaw Creek was about a half a CFS or a little better. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Very good. Could we scroll down to page 31, please, of the same? And I'd like to call your attention to the values for September 21st, 2003. Let's see that. 9/4/2003. Sorry, can't read my handwriting.
Okay, yeah, looks like there's 4 measurements there.
Right. And could you read the topmost measurement, 100 feet up from Ranch diversion flue? What's the value there?
2.4 CFS.
And 3 lines down, 200 feet below Marble Mountain Ranch diversion intake, what is the value there?
0.3 CFS.
Very good. So is it fair to say that in this exhibit, we have quite a range of quite a number of years of different flow values that the Karuk tribe or others have taken over a pretty long period of record?
Yes, that's fair.
Very good. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
you, Mr. Schutz. Would anybody from Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association like to question the witness? And at this point, Mr. Hunt, do you have any redirect testimony for Mr. Soto?
No.
Okay. Well, before we let you go, our staff have a few questions for you.
Mr. Soto, I have a couple questions about your professional experience. And you testified earlier today that you've been doing fisheries work in the Klamath for 20 years. Is that right?
Correct, more than 20 years.
More than 20 years. Do you know, I think we're going to end up with a range here, which is fine, but did you have a sense of the number of individual fish, of individual salmonids you've identified over your career? Are we talking hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands?
I would say it's in the tens of thousands, if not millions.
Okay. How common an occurrence has it been in your career for you to have misidentified a fish?
It's happened. Fish are at different life stages are difficult to ID, and it's happened before.
Are we talking ones, tens, hundreds, thousands?
I would say in the probably the ones or tens.
Okay. And then how common is it for you to have to determine the cause of death or the likely cause of death for a dead fish?
It's pretty common to look at the clinical signs, which is basically just what you see, as far as like a distended stomach or pale gills or something like that. But we rely on providing samples to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Fish Health Lab in Red Bluff to do a more detailed analysis of the fish to determine the exact cause of death.
Okay, so is it fair to say then that there are specific indicators that you would look for?
Yes.
Okay. Can we pull up the picture of the coho salmon from 2009 again? I think it's WR84, but I may be wrong about that.
Just for the record, these fish are also, or these pictures are also in KT5.
Okay. Let's actually go to KT5 since that's the one that you testified to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to click on the hyperlink.
Okay. This is the same fish you spoke about before, correct?
Yes, it is.
And I recall it was your testimony that you concluded this was a coho salmon based on the par markings, fin coloration, and other features like that. Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
Thank you. If this fish were a Chinook salmon at this life stage, what would it look like?
It would look similar, but the par marks would be wider and wider spaced. It wouldn't have a sickle-shaped anal fin, and you can kind of see there's a black leading edge to the anal fin. But they're closely related, but they're so it would look similar, but it would be the par marks would be a giveaway. But when Chinook have par marks as well, but they don't have a sickle-shaped anal fin.
Okay. If this fish were a resident steelhead at this life stage, what would it look like?
The par marks would be more blotchy. The fins would have more rounded edges, and the primary way to tell the difference is the dorsal fin that's on my index finger there, it would have spots on it if it was a steelhead.
Okay. When you say blotchy, what does that mean?
Meaning they're more oval shape
Okay.
and not as uniform.
So less of a bar, more of an oval.
Yes,
And
yes.
not as uniform. Okay.
And if it was a steelhead can also have more kind of rainbow color, and they're also known as rainbow trout. So.
For the residents, if it were a anadromous steelhead at this life stage, would it look the same, or would there be other, as a resident, or would there be other differences?
Resident steelhead and anadromous steelhead at this life stage are identical.
Okay, and the 4 species we've just discussed, or the 4 types, I'm an attorney, you can tell, but the 4 types we've just discussed are coho, chinook, and the 2 varieties of steelhead. Are there other salmonids known to be present in Stanshaw Creek, or just those 4?
Just for the record, that steelhead are the same species, whether they're resident or anadromous. So there's really 3 species, and I am unaware of any other salmonids in Stanshaw Creek.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or yes, almost good afternoon, Mr. Soto. I have a couple questions. First, could we pull up KT9 and look at page 4, figure 1? It might be page 4 of the document. I mean, like, as numbered in the document. Here we are. You recall testifying about this figure?
I do.
Could you tell us what the units are for both temperature and flow on the figure?
So the temperature units are in Celsius, and the flow units are in cubic feet per second.
Okay, thank you. Also, during your direct testimony, you testified regarding a few photos. Could we go to KT5, picture number 2? While you were discussing impacts during this low volume period of the pond, I believe you said, quote, "the pond began to fill again," and I'm curious if you could clarify if you meant with water or sediment or something else.
It was my impression that when I arrived here that day, that the pond was starting to fill up slowly, like it had been lower, and it looked like it was starting to fill just based on there was a bunch of debris scattered on the pond where that had somehow dried out and then floated, became dry, and then when the water started to rise, that debris was floating all over the pond. There were little pieces of bark and driftwood.
Okay, so with water.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, you testified regarding typical placement of temperature gauges.
Mm-hmm.
At what depth would you typically place a temperature gauge?
We try to put them in a spot that's deep enough where we believe that they're going to stay wet. So we put them in, a deep area. I usually put them in a place where if you have a safe channel cross section, depending on the stream, of course, the Klamath River is huge, so you have to be selective where you put them in the main stem, but in small creeks, I try to put them in a low spot where they're going to be wet. When you look at the flows, they drop down to a base flow. So you want to put them in a place where you're going to have water at the base flow, summer base flow.
And that would be similar for a pool. You would put it in a low spot.
Yeah, I think this spot our cables are all 10-foot long stainless steel cable with a metal housing, and we just toss them out there and attach them to a tree.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
I have a couple of follow-ups based on Ms. Irby's questions. Do you have any reason to think that the temperature gauge that was installed when we had this event in 2009 where the temperature was above 100 degrees, do you have any reason to think that that would not have been installed following the protocol you just described?
I assume it was installed following the protocol I just described.
And that's based on your professional experience?
Yes.
Okay. Do the gauges float or anything if they become detached?
No, they're in like thick metal pipe.
Okay.
So they don't float.
So there's no. Are you aware of any way other than changes in the water level that could plausibly have caused that gauge to be getting an air temperature reading?
If a human could come in there and pull it out of the extreme or something like that, we try to hide them.
Okay. Did you see any evidence of recent human presence at the site when you were there in late July that you recall?
Not that I recall. I mean, it is a place where there's residents nearby. So
Is that something you would typically look for during a site visit, or it just if you notice it, you notice it?
I don't look for that typically.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just follow up. We try not to place these places in active swimming holes, for example, where there's a lot of human activity, like campgrounds and things like that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
One follow-up regarding the gauge. Does the gauge record temperature once an hour or at a different interval?
We set them to record temperature hourly, but you can set them to record at any time interval you want to.
For the data that we have on this gauge, can you testify that it was per hour, or are you not aware?
I think it was hourly based on the spreadsheets I was looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one additional follow-up question on that? Do you have an hypothesis of what actually happened to that gauge on that day?
Well, first of all, I don't know what gauge he's using, but my hypothesis is that the flow dropped to the point where the gauge was exposed by the air.
But if I'm understanding what you just testified to of being placed normally in like a pond, that would have to be a pretty significant decrease or drop for that to dry out. Is that correct?
It would. And the gauges are put in the beginning of summer, so the flows may have already been, dropping through the summer. So I don't think the gauge was, or the probes were placed like immediately before I was here.
I have a couple questions for Mr. Soto.
Sure, go right ahead, Ms. Farwell-Jensen.
My first question is, were you here yesterday when Sherry Whitmore was testifying as to beaver activity along Sandshaw Creek?
Yeah, I was here.
And do you have any knowledge of beaver activity along the creek?
I've seen beaver chewed sticks in this pond and other signs like willows that have been chewed and fallen.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Have you noticed that activity has changed over time?
No, I still see beaver sign in this pond.
Okay, but no growth or decrease of the amount of chewed sticks or other signs of beaver?
No, and my observations are just, I'm not specifically looking for beavers,
Sure,
but...
Absolutely. Okay. My second question is you mentioned having a staff. You're working with the staff when you're doing
My technicians.
your
yeah,
technicians,
yeah.
and how many do you work with?
Any given year, usually about 6 technicians during the summer.
Okay, real good, thank you.
Well, good. Since we took a break recently, I'd like to continue. And Mr. Hunt, do you want to, and then invite Mr. Soto to be done. It's been a long morning, so thank you for all your assistance. And Mr. Hunt, you have another witness, and can we get that underway for that direct testimony?
Sure.
All right, so I want to administer the oath. Mr. Tucker, welcome. Please stand, thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth? If so, answer yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated, and Mr. Hunt, please proceed.
Good afternoon. Will you please provide us with your name and address?
My name's Craig Tucker. I live at 1289 Azalea Avenue, McKinleyville, California, 95519.
And can you tell us about your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree from the defending national championship Clemson University Tigers, and I have a PhD in biochemistry from Vanderbilt University.
Thank you. So should we refer to you as Dr. Tucker?
If you want to stroke my ego, that wouldn't be how you would do it. But no.
Can you tell us how long what your position is with the Crook tribe?
I've worked for the Crook tribe for approximately 12 or 13 years. I'm the natural resources policy advocate for the Crook tribe, and I typically engage at local, state, and federal level dealing with legislation or administrative proceedings or policy that deals with water quality, water flows in the Klamath River.
I think that may have covered my next question. Is there anything else about your job responsibilities that you would like to tell us?
I think that covers it.
Okay. Can you tell us how you became familiar with Stanshaw Creek?
I was familiar with Stanshaw Creek for a number of years just because there had been so much effort from Taz, my colleague's shop. I have a friendly relationship with Will Harling at the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council. I have a working relationship with Conrad Fisher. So I knew that there was quite a bit of debate over flows in Stanshaw Creek, and I knew that there was an effort by the tribe to restore and protect the off-stream pond down there at the mouth of Stanshaw Creek.
Can you tell us in the time that you spent with the Karuk tribe how much of the work that you've done has been related to coho salmon and other salmonids on the Klamath River?
Well, I don't have the benefit of actually getting wet as often as Taz does, but because coho are ESA listed, a lot of the rules and regulations from both state and federal agencies revolve around the ESA listing. For example, the Bureau of Reclamation's diversion and use of water in the upper basin has to accommodate the needs of coho salmon because of that ESA listing. So coho salmon really influences a lot of policy around water use in the Klamath.
Okay. If we can pull up Mr. Tucker's written testimony, it's KT2, just so we can all follow along. In it, you say that Stanshaw Creek, let's see if we can scroll down. I don't know the exact location. Yeah, it's on the bottom of page 1 onto page 2. It says that Stanshaw Creek is considered by state and federal agencies to be important cold water refugia for ESA-listed coho salmon. And then it goes on. Can you elaborate on this a little bit for us?
Yeah, and Forest Service plans, coho restoration plans, and the Klamath Basin plan, they identify these cold water refugial areas as being really important for the life cycle of coho salmon, and list explicitly Stanshaw Creek as one of these cold water refugial areas.
And then in the next sentence, referring to coho salmon, Chinook salmon, and steelhead trout, can you explain, it says all of these species are Karuk Tribal Trust resources. Can you elaborate on that?
The United States has a special obligation to federally recognized Indian tribes to protect trust resources, which tribes can identify in a variety of ways. This kind of goes all the way back to the Commerce Clause in the United States Constitution, but there's a variety of executive orders and statutes and court decisions that sort of create and describe this trust obligation. But it means the United States has an obligation to protect these resources for the use of the tribe. And trust resources can be anything from archaeological sites to contemporary physical sites to natural resources such as salmon and acorns, which are for the Karuk tribe of particular importance.
And that was the federal government. What about the state of California? What obligations does the state have to protect tribal trust resources?
Well, the state of California has actually, in recent years, become better about articulating its obligation to Indian tribes. And in fact, in 2011, Governor Jerry Brown issued Executive Order B-1011, which directed all state agencies to develop consultation policies with tribes. I think the California Natural Resources Agency was the first agency to actually do that. And there's actually been changes to the California Environmental Quality Act that require mitigation to tribal resources if they are identified in a CEQA analysis.
Okay. Let's get a little more focused on Stanshaw Creek specifically here. Can you give us a history of the Karuk tribe's efforts to work with Marble Mountain Ranch to solve the issues related to the diversion and impacts on Stanshaw Creek?
Well, I think some of these efforts predate my time with the tribe, actually. But as the tribe has been engaged in some of these projects to enhance the cold water pond down at the mouth of Stanshaw Creek, there's constantly been this concern that diversions to Marble Mountain Ranch did not allow enough water to reach the pond, did not maintain the connectivity between the pond and the Klamath River. And for many years, to the credit of the tribe's efforts are really focused around collaboration with the landowner. The tribe has been willing to help the landowner find grants, whether from public or private sources, to help upgrade his irrigation infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And I'm typically assigned to projects that are difficult to resolve. And so I came in to work on this, had meetings with that big stakeholder group in December of 2014, and we were really, our patience was really starting to run out. We felt like we had been working on this for 2 decades and not solving the problem. And so I was directed by my boss, Mr. Hillman, to develop alternative strategies to resolving the impasse with Mr. Cole. I attended the December 2014 stakeholders meeting and left it very optimistic. It seemed to me that Mr. Cole indicated a lot of comfort with the information provided in the Lanahan report, a lot of comfort with the information provided by Joey Howard's report, and he indicated that as long as business was good, the diesel fuel costs were something that he could manage in the context of the economic viability of his operation. So I left that meeting feeling like, hey, this physical solution is likely to work. The landowner seems willing to play ball with Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and I felt like this problem was close to being resolved.
Did you have any meetings with Mr. Cole following that December 2014 meeting?
Yes, and in January of 2015, Leif Hillman and myself met Mr. Cole at Marble Mountain Ranch and discussed the issue and actually walked the ditch and went and viewed the diversion.
And when you left that meeting, how did you feel the process was going? And
I was very optimistic. I had every indication or every reason to believe that this physical solution was going to play itself out, and that we would be able to work collaboratively with Mr. Cole to get grant money and address the concern and upgrade the ditch and upgrade. This is infrastructure that's 150 years old. And so, it was clearly high time that we upgrade this infrastructure and upgrade the conveyance system.
Okay, I wonder if you could, in the process, the stakeholder process and other things that you've participated in, reading the reports related to options available to Marble Mountain Ranch, if you could, with that background, can you answer this question, which is, what are the options in your mind available to Marble Mountain Ranch to ensure that the public trust and tribal trust resources that Stanshall Creek provides are not harmed, while at the same time obtaining the needs regarding electricity that Mr. Cole has testified are necessary to operate the ranch?
Well, there's been quite a few studies that's part of the record that looks at the ability to use solar power, to integrate solar and diesel together. I'm pretty familiar. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who live in that stretch of the Middle Klamath, and the people who are, off the grid have a more dependable power supply than people who are on the grid, actually, because of the remoteness of the area and the rough winters. But no one requires a 3 CFS diversion in order to meet their power needs, and even there are neighborhoods in the area with multiple houses that meet their power needs with dramatically smaller diversions. I mean, 3 CFS, you think about, a CFS is about the volume of a basketball. So 3 CFS is like 3 basketballs of water passing a point a second. That's a lot of water. So it just, not being an engineer, it looked to me like there had been quite a bit of investigation and alternatives to using this amount of water to power his system.
Can you elaborate, to the extent you know, what options the Karuk tribe believes would be available to Mr. Cole?
Well, the kinds of options that were provided by Joy Howard, I mean, we don't want to be in the position of having to solve Mr. Cole's problem for him. The problem we want to solve is that fish have a hard time getting in and out of the thermal refuge at the mouth of Stanshall Creek. We would support efforts by Mr. Cole and others to develop, engineered solutions, whether they be solar, smaller scale of hydro, or some mix of energy sources. We could support any of these things, but we're pretty adamant there needs to be a minimal bypass flow past his diversion that maintains the integrity of that pool and maintains connectivity to the extent possible between the pool and the river.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hunt. And so at this time, we would offer up the witness for cross-examination questions, but it is 12:24, and so earlier we talked about compressing the lunch break, but I've also indicated that we are going to continue as late as 4:30 today, and so as a compromise, I'm going to suggest a 45-minute approximate lunch break, and request everyone return here at 1:10. Thank you.